So before we begin, we have to establish what climate change really is. Basically, climate change is the changing of weather patterns due to the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere, mainly caused by the burning and using of fossil fuels. My overall research question was, to what extent can we as humans prevent climate change, and is climate change beneficial in some ways? The first data source I used was Margaret Thatcher's speech to the UN General Assembly, and I use this because it explains what climate change is, some ways we can, and some ways we can fix it. My second article I used was The Urban Transformation of the Developing World by Mark R. Montgomery, and I use this because it explains how some people are moving to cities and how that affects weather patterns and atmospheric warming. My overall claim was that climate change is a problem that needs to be solved and actions need to be taken, even if some people think it is not real or that it could be beneficial. So overall, many people think the solution to this problem would be being more energy efficient by lowering fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are things like coal, natural gas, or petroleum, and natural gas. Although this is a solution, it is way too broad and doesn't give enough specifics on how to lower the use of fossil fuels, so it therefore will not work. This leads us to our first stakeholders, farmers. Farmers are people who do think climate change could be beneficial because the increased CO2 in the atmosphere helps plants grow, and the increased temperatures have cause longer growing seasons. This is talked a lot about in the article Climate Change, What Is It? By Alejandro Ruiz. And as seen here in this graph from NASA, you can see that plant and leaf growth have both increased since the beginning of climate change. This perspective is taken into account when trying to figure out a narrow solution. Farmers would be people who would not want to stop climate change because it is beneficial for them, and even though they have evidence to support their argument, some people do still think it's bad. For example, zoos, who are the voice of animals. In Margaret Thatcher's speech to the UN, she states, "Data confirms that the first-year ice, which forms the bulk of sea ice cover, is remarkably thin, and so is probably unable to sustain significant atmospheric warming without melting." This causes a lot of problems for polar animals, especially polar bears and penguins, because they mostly live on this ice, and when this ice melts, it's difficult for them to survive. This causes zoos to want to help stop climate change to help protect these animals. Zoos are able to make a big impact because they have a good climate for developing and transmitting social norms that encourage environmental concern and behavior. And many people who visit zoos do love animals and want to do whatever they can to protect them. A lot of zoos that are heavily focused on climate change are ones that are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, including notable ones like the Bronx Zoo, the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo, and the Cincinnati Zoo. Unlike farmers, zoos speak out to prevent climate change and protect animals and taking action like said in my claim. This all leads us to our final narrowed down solution, which unlike our first broad solution has specific things that need to be done. This solution is marine cloud brightening, which is basically spraying ocean water on the clouds to lighten them, which in turn reflects the light and keeps the earth cooler. This takes both perspectives into account because it keeps a high amount of CO2 in the atmosphere for plants, but also prevents the melting of ice for polar animals. Some limitations for this, though, are funding. It will take a lot of money for this to be done, and it will mostly have to come from donations and from the government. And some governments do not believe that climate change is something that they should be focused on, so that would be a problem. And the second limitation would be everyone in the world has to work together, because if only one country is doing this, then it will not solve any problems. In conclusion, although climate change might benefit us right now, in the future it will ultimately harm animals and wipe out all life.
Okay, a couple of questions for you.
Yes, I forgot.
The first one is, how did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct research, and then were they effective?
The strategies I used to conduct research were just taking keywords out of my research question and typing into things like EBSCO, and this allowed me to have more narrowed down research instead of just typing climate change, but typing in stuff like it could be beneficial, and this was helpful to my argument because it gave me both sides of the argument.
So you feel like they were effective?
Yes.
Okay, and your second question is, if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to the issue?
I would have done more research on why some governments do not think that climate change is as important as it really is, because they have a big hand in what gets done about it, because they have a lot of funding and say in laws and stuff.